Oxygen tanks for November. $400. Adult diapers, premium brand. $50. Dietary supplements. $120. Richard closed the leather book and looked at the investors gathered around our dinner table. Every business has dead weight, he said, his voice smooth as oil. And tonight, I am liquidating mine. He didn't wait for a response. He unlocked the brakes on my grandfather's wheelchair and shoved him straight out the back door into the 20-degree below zero blizzard. You can join him, he told me. Or you can serve dessert. I grabbed my coat and ran into the snow. The deadbolt clicked shut behind us. Before I tell you what he did when he realized who actually owned the ground he was standing on, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. Most people would have pounded on the door. They would have screamed, begged, or thrown themselves against the wood until their knuckles bled. But I didn't move. I stood there in the ankle-deep snow, listening to the muffled sound of jazz music drifting from inside the warm house, and I forced my heart rate to slow down. My name is Natalie. I am 26 years old, and I have spent my entire life learning that panic is a luxury I cannot afford. Panic burns calories. Panic clouds judgment. And right now, judgment was the only thing standing between my grandfather and hypothermia. I looked down at Edward. He was shaking violently, his thin frame rattling the metal of the wheelchair. The temperature was dropping every second. The wind coming off the mountain cut through my thin sweater like a razor blade. I took off my coat and wrapped it around him, tucking the edges under his legs. Natalie, he chattered, his teeth clicking together. He's really done it. Save your breath, Grandpa, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat, metallic, devoid of fear. We aren't going to die here. I pulled out my phone. My fingers were already stiff, clumsy with cold. I didn't call a taxi. I didn't call a friend to come save us. I opened the keypad and dialed 3 numbers. 911. Emergency, the operator said. I need to report an attempted murder in progress, I said. I didn't shout. I spoke with the precision of a court reporter. Location is the Pinnacle Estate, Aspen Heights. My father has just pushed an 80-year-old disabled man out of his home into a blizzard and locked the doors. The temperature is 20 below zero. If you do not arrive in 10 minutes, you will be collecting bodies. Ma'am. Stay on the line, the operator said, her voice spiking with alarm. I didn't stay on the line. I hung up. I had work to do. I opened my camera app. The red recording light blinked on, a tiny beacon in the storm. I didn't film a tearful plea for help. I filmed a crime scene. I panned the camera to the heavy oak doors, zooming in on the deadbolt. I walked to the window and filmed the guests inside, laughing, raising glasses of champagne, oblivious to the fact that they were accessories to a crime. I filmed Richard, my father, standing by the fireplace, looking satisfied. Then I turned the camera on Grandpa. I captured his blue lips, the snow accumulating on his eyelashes, the way his hands clawed at the blanket. December 24th, I narrated, my voice cutting through the wind. 7:14 p.m. Richard Carter has locked us out. He has confiscated the medical equipment. He is aware of the temperature. This is not an eviction. This is a disposal. I hit stop. The video saved. Evidence secured. Sirens cut through the howling wind 4 minutes later. Blue and red lights washed over the snow, painting the driveway in violent flashes of color. A cruiser skidded to a halt at the gate, and an officer jumped out, his breath pluming in the air. "Ma'am!" he yelled, running toward the gate code pad. I didn't wait for him to figure it out. I reached through the bars and hit the emergency release sequence I had memorized when I was 12. The gates groaned open. They loaded Grandpa into the back of the cruiser immediately, cranking the heat until it blasted us like a furnace. The officer was asking questions, names, relations, medical history. I answered them in short, clipped sentences. I didn't tell him about my feelings. I gave him data points. As the cruiser pulled away, I looked back at the mansion one last time. It glowed on the hill, a golden fortress of warmth and arrogance. Richard thought he had won. He thought he had trimmed the fat. He thought we were just trash he had successfully taken to the curb. He didn't realize that by throwing us out, he hadn't destroyed us. He had freed us. And he had just handed me the weapon I would use to burn his entire kingdom to the ground. The shelter smelled of bleach and industrial soup, a sharp contrast to the pine and cinnamon scent of the mansion we had just been thrown out of. Grandpa Edward was sleeping on a cot in the corner, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that was still too shallow for my liking. I sat on the floor under the emergency exit sign, the only place with enough light to read, and opened the waterproof file folder I had taped to my torso 3 years ago. People always asked me why I stayed. Why I let Richard treat me like a servant in my own home. Why I let him mock my waitressing job while he burned through the family fortune. They thought it was loyalty. They thought it was hope. They were wrong. It wasn't loyalty. It was a stakeout. I flipped past the birth certificates and the medical records until I found the document that mattered. It was old. The paper yellowed at the edges. Dated 30 years ago. It was titled, Ground Lease Agreement. The Pinnacle Estate. I remembered the day Richard decided to renovate. It was 5 years ago. He had just declared himself CEO, a title that meant nothing since the company was hemorrhaging money. But he needed the appearance of power. He ripped out the oak floorboards my grandmother had chosen and replaced them with Italian marble. He installed gold-plated fixtures in the guest bathrooms. He built a helipad on the south lawn. Look at this place. He had sneered, kicking Grandpa's worn-out slippers out of the way. It finally looks like a palace. You should thank me, old man. I'm turning your rotting legacy into something worth owning. He laughed at Grandpa's silence. He thought the silence was dementia. He thought it was weakness. He didn't know that every ounce of gold he plated onto the walls, every slab of marble he laid down, every $1 million he poured into the structure, he was donating to us. Because Richard didn't own the land. The document in my hand was clear. My grandfather, Edward, held the fee simple title to the land, the Shadow Estate. Richard held only a leasehold interest in the structure. He owned the walls, the roof, and the gold toilets. But he rented the dirt they stood on. And like any rental agreement, there were rules. I ran my finger down to Section 24, Paragraph B, the Criminal Forfeiture Clause. In the event the lessee engages in felony criminal conduct against the lesser or any immediate family member upon the premises, this lease shall immediately terminate. All improvements, structures, and assets attached to the land shall revert to the lesser without compensation. I looked at the timestamp on my video. 7:14 p.m. Richard hadn't just tried to kill his father. He had violated Section 24 by pushing that wheelchair out the door. He hadn't just committed attempted murder. He had actively, legally, and irrevocably transferred ownership of his entire $50 million renovation project to the man shivering on the cot behind me. He thought he was evicting us. In reality, he had just evicted himself. And he had paid for the privilege with every cent he had stolen. I closed the file. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel conflicted. I felt the cold, hard click of a trap, snapping shut. By morning, the storm had broken, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of pristine, indifferent snow. I checked my phone. My battery was at 12%. But the screen was lit up with notifications. Not calls. Not voicemails, asking if we were alive. Social media alerts. I opened Instagram. The first thing I saw was a photo of the dinner table we had been thrown away from. The plates were cleared. The crystal was gleaming. The caption, written by Richard, read, "Sometimes leadership requires making the hard calls. Trimmed the fat tonight. Success requires sacrifice. Merry Christmas, from the Pinnacle." I scrolled down. There were comments from his business partners. Ruthless as always. Richard. Respect. Alpha move. He hadn't just abandoned us. He was bragging about it. He was turning our near-death experience into a LinkedIn leadership lesson. Then a text came through. It was from him. "Don't bother coming back for your clothes. I burned them in the fireplace. Consider it a cleansing." I stared at the screen. The last thread of doubt, that tiny, irrational part of me that wondered if he might have regretted it, if he might have woken up with a hangover and a conscience, snapped. He wasn't sorry. He was celebrating. He thought he was untouchable. He thought he was the king of the mountain, safe in his castle, drinking his scotch and warming his feet by the fire fueled by my winter coats. He thought we were gone, frozen, broken, or simply disappeared into the ether of poverty he so despised. He didn't know I was watching. He didn't know that every arrogant post, every cruel text, every digital footprint he was leaving was just another nail in the coffin I was building for him. I looked over at Grandpa. He was awake, sitting on the edge of the cot, watching me. He looked frail, but his eyes were clear. The confusion of the hypothermia had passed, replaced by a hard, flinty resolve. "He thinks he's won, doesn't he?" Grandpa asked. "Yes," I said. "He thinks we're dead." "Good," Grandpa said. "Dead men don't sue. And dead men don't evict." I stood up. I didn't feel tired anymore. I didn't feel cold. I felt the kind of clarity that only comes when you realize your enemy has made a fatal mistake. He had burned my clothes. He had canceled the insurance. He had publicly declared his victory. He had just given me everything I needed to destroy him. "Get ready, Grandpa," I said. "We have an appointment." I didn't go to the police station to file a complaint. I went to the glass and steel tower downtown that housed the offices of Sterling and Vance. Most people think of lawyers as people you call when you're in trouble. But when you have the kind of money my grandfather had secretly amassed, lawyers aren't defenders. They are weapons. Mr. Sterling was waiting for me. He didn't offer condolences. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He simply slid a single sheet of paper across the mahogany desk. The police report has been filed, he said. His voice was dry, devoid of emotion. Attempted murder is a felony. Under the terms of the ground lease. Specifically Article 4, Section C. The commission of a felony on the premises by the lessee results in immediate termination of tenancy. I looked at the document. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a request for mediation. It was an emergency writ of possession. Richard had spent years mocking me. He called me uneducated because I didn't go to business school. He called me slow because I didn't ruthlessly climb the corporate ladder. He thought power came from shouting the loudest in the boardroom. He didn't understand that real power is quiet. Real power is a signature on a piece of paper that turns a king into a trespasser in the blink of an eye. Does he know? I asked. Not yet, Sterling said. We bypassed the standard 30-day notice. Because of the immediate danger to the landlord, your grandfather, the judge, granted an ex parte order. That means we don't have to wait for a hearing. We don't have to listen to his excuses. He picked up a heavy rubber stamp and brought it down on the document. Approved. The sound was satisfyingly final. The sheriff's department has been notified, Sterling continued. They are treating this as a high-priority removal. They are meeting us at the property in 1 hour. I stood up. My legs felt steady for the first time in 24 hours. 1 hour, I repeated. Natalie, Sterling said, pausing as he closed the file. You understand what happens the moment we serve this? We aren't just kicking him out. We are locking the assets. The bank accounts, the cars, the furniture, everything inside that house is technically considered improvements under the lease. It all reverts to the trust. I thought about the gold-plated faucets. I thought about the Italian marble floors Richard had screamed at me for walking on with shoes. I thought about the collection of vintage scotch he drank while my grandfather shivered in a threadbare blanket. Richard had spent $50 million trying to look like a billionaire. And in 60 minutes, I was going to confiscate every cent of it. I understand, I said. Good, Sterling said. He stood up and buttoned his jacket. Let's go take your house back. We walked out of the office and into the waiting elevator. I didn't check my phone. I didn't check Richard's social media to see if he was still celebrating. It didn't matter anymore. He was already a ghost. He just didn't know he was dead yet. Sterling didn't move toward the door. He turned back to his computer, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the monitor. There's something else, he said. Before we go, you need to see this. I stopped. What is it? We ran a full audit on the property title this morning, Sterling said. Standard procedure before an eviction. We found a lien. A lien? I frowned. Richard doesn't own the property. He can't borrow against it. He can't legally borrow against the land, Sterling corrected. But he can borrow against the leasehold interest. And he did. Heavily. He turned the monitor so I could see. It was a chaotic web of transactions, loans, and wire transfers. Richard took out 3 separate loans against the renovations, Sterling explained. He convinced the bank that the improvements, the marble, the gold, the helipad added enough value to secure a line of credit. He forged documents claiming he had an option to buy the land, which inflated the valuation. How much? I asked. $12 million, Sterling said. And he funneled all of it into his failing company to make payroll and keep up appearances. I stared at the numbers. This wasn't just eviction anymore. This was fraud. Bank fraud. Wire fraud. The kind of crimes that didn't just get you sued, they got you federal prison time. Sterling explained that if the lease was voided for Richard's crime, the loans would collapse and the bank would demand repayment. Richard didn't have $12 million, or even $12,000, and would go to prison. Then came the blow. He had forged Natalie's signature as cosigner, making her legally complicit unless they recovered the original ground lease locked in his safe. Without it, Richard could destroy the evidence and claim legitimacy. Natalie realized she had to break in before police arrived. She entered the mansion mid-party, confronted Richard, and served his eviction notice. In front of stunned guests, she revealed that his felony terminated the lease and transferred every improvement to the Carter Trust. As police cars pulled up, Richard panicked, locked the house down with his security system, and threatened to burn everything. Natalie pointed out that he had built his own prison. Moments later, SWAT broke through, arrested him, and brought her grandfather inside. Edward declared that while he had built a home, Richard had built a prison, and would now live in one. Natalie later sold the mansion, used the proceeds to found a charity, and burned Richard's ledger as closure. She ends by inviting anyone who has cut off a toxic relative to know they are not alone.